Money is a strange thing. It means different things to different people, and everyone has their own unique relationship with money. The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel explores this topic and explains that it's often our relationship with money which determines our level of financial success, rather than our intelligence or business knowledge. In other words, how we behave when it comes to money is much more important than what we know. In this video, I'll explain the 7 key lessons that I learned when reading this book, and how they can help us work towards financial success and freedom in our lives. You've definitely heard people say that money doesn't buy happiness, and a lot of people will use this as a justification for not pursuing money or wealth generation as a goal. And while it's definitely true that splashing out on fancy cars or expensive holidays won't buy us happiness over the long term, what it can buy is control in our lives. As Housel puts it in the book, the highest form of wealth is the ability to wake up in the morning and say, I can do what I want today. The ability to do what you want, when you want, with who you want, for as long as you want, is priceless. It's the highest dividend that money pays. He then goes on to explain that many studies have shown that control over our time is one of the broadest lifestyle variables that make us happy. It's much more important than the car you drive, the size of your house, or the prestige of your job. In other words, money and wealth can't buy us happiness in and of itself, but what it can provide is the ability to control our time, which enables us to spend more time with friends and family, on hobbies, to retire early, and to generally just live life on our own terms, which definitely can provide happiness, as many studies have shown. There are a lot of people who want to get rich in order to buy expensive things to show off to other people. But unfortunately, signalling one's wealth through buying expensive possessions is a really bad idea for 2 main reasons. Firstly, people will not care that you've now got expensive things, and they won't think any higher of you. What they might think is, wow, that's a really nice car. People will think I'm really cool if I was driving that car. So rather than admiring you, the person that's bought the car, they're really just admiring the car itself and imagining themselves driving it. This is what Housel calls the man in the car paradox, and explains that if you really want admiration and respect from other people, what you really should concentrate on is much more personal factors, such as humility, integrity, and empathy towards others, rather than simply buying stuff to show off. And the second reason why buying stuff to show off is a really bad idea is because the bar of what we consider impressive will continually rise, and we'll never be satisfied with what we have, which will inevitably lead to a spending spiral. This sort of thing happens to celebrities all the time. Think about how many news stories you've seen over the years talking about how a celebrity has squandered millions and is now filing for bankruptcy, simply because they couldn't stop spending in order to show off to their other celebrity friends. In reality, Housel argues that true wealth is very often hidden away and very rarely takes the form of conspicuous consumption and outward displays of wealth. So what we've seen so far is that spending money on things to impress others is in many ways self-defeating. And this is also true because once you've spent money on something, you no longer have that money that you've spent. And this might sound really obvious, but I think it's worth pointing out as it's easy to forget sometimes. For example, if you see someone driving a 200 grand car, all that you know is that that person once had 200 grand and now doesn't because he spent it on a car. We can't actually infer anything about their investments or overall net worth. Whereas you could walk past a multi-millionaire investor in the street and be none the wiser, as their money is within investments and assets which aren't on show. In other words, wealth and your net worth is what's left over after you finish spending. So almost by definition it will be invisible, unless you happen to go around showing off your savings and investment balances in the street. And I suppose what follows from this is that in order to accumulate wealth, you must be living below your means. As if you spend 100% of your income on consumption, or worse, consume on borrowed money, then no wealth is being accumulated. You're simply staying in the same place, or even going backwards. So in order to accumulate wealth, saving is absolutely crucial. Recently I've been lucky enough to purchase my own house, and getting the money together for a deposit was an almighty slog when it came to saving, with every spare pound going towards the house fund. However, after moving in, my motivation to save absolutely evaporated, as there was no longer something big and immediate that I was saving for. And after all, I now felt like there was much less need for me to save money. But after reading the book, my mind was permanently changed. As touched on earlier, Housel explains that wealth is simply the accumulated leftovers of your income after you finish spending. And since you can save and therefore build wealth without being on a high income, but you've got no chance of building wealth if you spend as much as you earn, no matter your income, then it becomes clear that your savings rate is actually more important than your income when it comes to building wealth. So it doesn't matter how much money you have coming in. If you're not saving any of it, then you're not building any wealth. You're simply staying in the same place. So even if you've not got anything specific to save for, you should definitely be putting some away in order to build that wealth up over time. And for me, this links back to the first lesson that money buys time. You don't need something big and obvious to be saving for. You should just be saving anyway in order to buy yourself freedom and flexibility in the future. Housel also explains that past a certain level of spending, once we've covered the basic necessities and the things that we really value in life, that any further spending is simply a reflection of ego and is a desire to show off wealth to others. He goes as far as to define savings as the difference between income and ego, As in, if you've got a large income but a small ego, then your savings are going to be pretty big. However, if your ego is as big as your income, then you're not going to be saving anything. You're just going to be spending everything on conspicuous consumption. So I think the point that I take from this is that in order to build wealth over the long term, I should try and reduce my expenditure to as little as possible, obviously still covering the necessities and the things that I really value, but to try and cut out the ego-based spending, which is spending just to show off to others. And in many ways, letting go of this ego-based spending is very freeing in its own way, as you no longer feel like you have to keep up with everyone around you, and you can instead start to focus on yourself. Housel notes that there are many, many people that are stuck in stressful jobs that they don't enjoy, simply to earn enough money to keep up with their ego-based spending habits. However, to push back on this savings point slightly, in recent years it's become more and more difficult to save a substantial portion of your income due to things like inflation and the cost of living crisis. And I speak from personal experience when I say that there's often not that much left over to save after we finish spending on the necessities and the things that we really value in life, even after cutting back for ego-based spending. So the question is, if there's not that much left over to save at the end of the month, is there really any point in saving just a little amount? Well, the answer is definitely still yes, even if it's a really small amount, and hopefully this next point will illustrate why. The power of compounding is something that you might have heard of before, but I always find that it's easy to forget about, as it's not very intuitive, and our brains have a hard time processing and really appreciating the true power of compound interest. For those unaware, compounding, or compound interest, simply refers to the fact that when we receive interest or returns on an investment, they themselves will then receive interest or returns if we keep them invested. So this effect will compound over time and results in exponential growth over the long term. And the power of this is really mind-blowing. In the book, Housel uses the example of Warren Buffett, whose net worth in 2025 is $154 billion. Now, a lot of Buffett's net worth can be attributed to his tremendous investing success over the years. He's averaged an annual return of 22%. But the real key to this vast amount of wealth that he's managed to accumulate is the sheer amount of time that he spent investing, well over 80 years at this point, and the effects of compounding that have taken over. Now, to illustrate this with an example, let's say that Warren Buffett had a much more typical career length. Rather than start investing at age 10 to age 94, like he has done, let's say that he started investing at age 30 and decided to retire at age 60. Now, in this scenario, rather than being worth $154 billion, Buffett would have retired with a much more modest $11.9 million, almost 13,000 times less. So this really shows the true power of compounding and how having a long-term perspective when it comes to money is really, really important. And also how small amounts of savings and investments can balloon into something much more substantial over time. Also, Housel notes that because the major effects of compounding happen in the later years of an investment, it's important not to interrupt the compounding process prematurely by selling investments early. After all, the returns of the stock market are often non-linear, and there are years where your investments will drop drastically. But on average over the long term, the stock market has returned consistent growth, and the compounding effect has taken hold. But this only works if investors weathered the storm of the bad years and remained invested and stayed in the game. Financial success is one of those things that everyone seems to be striving for. But what actually is it, and when can we claim to have achieved it? For a lot of people, financial success is a vague concept and is difficult to define. For me, before I read the book, I just thought that financial success meant being rich enough not to have to work. But as Housel explains in the book, financial success will mean different things to different people, and therefore each individual should take some time to reflect on what they think financial success means for them and what their own personal definition would be. For example, your definition of financial success might mean having enough money to comfortably take a part-time job that's local to you, so you no longer have to worry about a long commute or the commitment of full-time hours. Defining your own version of financial success is important, as it will give you a goal to focus your attention on. And also, it will prevent a never enough attitude, which is where people are never satisfied with what they have and are constantly striving for more, even if it means sacrificing their own personal well-being. Housel also notes that your definition of financial success should be free from societal expectations and should be based on what you want, not what other people expect of you. After all, it's you that's got to put in the work to get yourself to this goal, so it should be for you, not for what other people expect. Also, the need for personal contentment is a big part of financial success. Housel explains that wealth and money without personal satisfaction and contentment is a hollow victory. When defining your own financial success, really question your own motivations and think about what you actually need to achieve a fulfilling life. Housel also distinguishes between greed and aspiration. He defines greed as a desire for more without a clear understanding of why, or an understanding of why which is outwardly focused, whereas aspiration is the improvement that we want to make to ourselves, which is in line with our own personal values and overall well-being. Having a personal financial and investing plan is a key step in achieving your definition of financial success. However, it's important that this plan is flexible and has plenty of room for manoeuvre. Housel explains that this is important for two main reasons. Firstly, because it's impossible to prepare for every single outcome, as surprises are common and a natural part of life. We should therefore try to build financial plans which are resilient and adaptable to changes, and ones which don't fall apart if unexpected events come our way. And we need to accept the role that surprises play in life. Preparedness doesn't mean trying to predict every single outcome. It instead means being flexible and adaptable to a wide range of different circumstances. And secondly, as time goes on, our preferences and values will change. What's important to us today might not be important to us in the future. And so our financial plans and goals should update if and when these preferences and values change. After all, financial planning isn't a set it and forget it type thing. It should constantly be being updated and changed as our preferences and circumstances change over time. So hopefully this has been interesting. And if you've made it this far, you might find some of our other videos valuable, as we've got many more videos on personal finance and investing. And if you've got any questions for me, please leave me a comment below and consider subscribing if you've enjoyed. Thanks for watching.